Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Let me move around. Like, ah!
Yeah.
This is part 2 of our joint writing exercise, the slow motion movement. 2 weeks ago, Nathan shared his, and I critiqued it. This week, I'll be sharing mine. It's a bit of a spoiler because it's in the world of the novel that we're writing. Nathan will share his critique, and I will react to him. So this should be interesting. I'll go ahead and begin by reading my scene. Arnold knelt. The clang of the metal grate beneath him echoed from the dimly lit concrete walls of the containment bunker that surrounded him. He leaned over and peered into the pool. The hazy fluid before him throbbed in purple and green wisps that glowed like the northern lights, but rushed and swirled through the pool like turbocharged swarms of waterborne insects or electric schools of microscopic fish. They moved faster than any animal in Arnold's knowledge could possibly travel through a gel that viscous. Trembling, he reached down. He hovered his bare right hand mere millimeters above the pool's surface and paused. Nothing changed. The air did not move. The flighty aurora continued its dance. The air held the same generic chemical smell, much like that of the old high school science classroom he would never visit again. Only the hum of some distant machinery was audible to Arnold's ears. Arnold clamped his eyes shut, brought in a deep breath through his nose, then blew slowly through pursed lips as he plunged his hand into the glowing gel and opened his eyes. He watched the greens and purples continuing their frantic journeys around the pool. The flow of their light seemed unaffected by the entrance of his hand. Of course, the gel was thick, so he hadn't created any real waves to speak of. He turned his attention to the contact he felt between his skin and the fluid. The initial chill, or was it warmth? He couldn't remember, had disappeared instantly. His hand felt practically numb. He looked to make sure it was still submerged. It was. His fingertips listened for the genetic song of the microbes. There it was, simple and faint, but clearly audible through the cells of his skin. Arnold closed his eyes again and inhaled slowly, as if breathing in the music he had started to hear in his hand. There was more. His head shifted, his forehead wrinkled, his eyebrows raised. He moved his fingers, curling then straightening them while sweeping his hand, palm down, just beneath the surface of the pool. The song suddenly grew, not louder, but far more intricate. In an instant, otherworldly tunes, unlike any he had ever heard with his ears or hands, doubled and tripled with new voices added at a furious pace. Overlapping microtonal melodies competed with underlying chords ranging from droning rumbles to ringing chimes. His hands felt nothing, but they seemed to have heard everything. Without realizing it, Arnold picked up one rapidly repeating phrase and began playing along, mimicking the genetic tune and sending his own rendition back into the pool. He first noticed a hint of blue light wafting from his hand and dissolving into purple and green before joining the aurora. Immediately afterwards, he started to feel a mild sting wherever his skin had joined the song. Recoiling, he yanked his hand out of the pool and began shaking off the microbes whose concert he had just interrupted. His face filled with fear, he looked up at the now splattered Mr. Jackson. Arnold expected to be greeted with a look of disgust. What he saw instead was a huge smile and eyes that appeared to beam with curiosity.
All right. I really liked the beginning of it, that first sentence there. The clang of the metal grate beneath him echoed from the dimly lit concrete walls of the containment bunker that surrounded him. I felt like that really set the scene well, helping you figure out where you are. I like the picture there. Going to the description there of what is in this pool. The hazy fluid before him throbbed in purple and green wisps. When I got that far into the sentence, the image that popped into my head was a puddle of gasoline. Like it has these wisps of purple and green colors that are moving around, or gasoline on water, or just gasoline. That was the image that popped into my head at first. And so everything else kind of modified that image of gasoline in my head, which was incorrect, an incorrect image. That glowed like the northern lights, but rushed and swirled through the pool like turbocharged swarms of waterborne insects or electric schools of microscopic fish. And when I was reading that, I didn't realize that that comparison there was, I don't know, what am I trying to say? I interpreted the latter half of the sentence to be less literal than it was meant to be.
Oh.
So it actually is supposed to be describing animals that are moving around, or organisms that are moving around. But I didn't interpret it as describing organisms that were moving around.
And I don't think they are organisms that are moving around.
Okay.
but it looks like organisms that are moving around.
I still didn't even get the idea that they were organisms until we get to the next sentence. They moved faster than any animal in Arnold's knowledge could possibly travel through a gel that viscous.
And so you're reading that as if I were saying that it actually is an animal that must really be fast.
Or at least that's Arnold's impression of it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So my mind kind of took a roundabout path to get to what you were trying to describe. But then at the end there of that paragraph, could possibly travel through a gel that viscous, that contradicted the image that I had from the very beginning, where they said it was the hazy fluid. And so fluid versus viscous gel seemed to be contradictory there.
When I read that, I thought, if I just reversed gel and fluid, if I said the hazy gel before him.
Yeah, a fluid that viscous.
Right. I think that could have done a lot to take care of that problem.
Yeah, that's a easy switch.
Okay.
Further down, nothing changed. The air did not move. The flighty aurora continued its dance. I like the short sentences there, kind of like you mentioned in mine. There were a couple short sentences to build the tension. Also, the fact that nothing's changing and the noticing that nothing is changing, that builds the tension as well. The next sentence, talking about the chemical smell, much like that of the old high school science classroom, he would never visit again. I think in an isolated scene that feels a little out of place because we don't know anything about this classroom. But if it's a part of a larger story like this is meant to be, if we have sufficient setup in that classroom where something happens there, or at least there's some recognition of that classroom earlier in the book, then it can be effective and impactful.
I'm curious your take on this.
Okay.
The he would never visit again, that does have an anchor in the past because he's been yanked out of his high school arena.
Right.
What I was trying to accomplish there was to help the reader figure out what the smell was, to be able to place them there.
Okay.
So, hey, reader, remember what a high school science classroom smells like? That's what this smells like. So I wonder if we never do mention the specific classroom, but we do talk about him never visiting his high school again. What do you think that does to your comment?
I think that's acceptable. I think it's best if there is something specific in that classroom.
Okay.
I think that would make it more impactful.
Okay.
But I think at least having some sort of setup, even if it isn't specifically the science classroom, if it's trying to evoke that specific smell in the minds of the reader, I think that can be helpful.
Okay.
Further on, of course, the gel was thick, so he hadn't created any real waves to speak of. Maybe it's just that's not the way that I talk, but real and to speak of seem to be redundant, but also just one of them seems insufficient. So some other descriptive single modifier, I think, would be best there.
This was one of those where it feels a little clunky. We'll just leave it and see what happens. It felt a little clunky to you too, so that says something. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
All right.
The initial chill, or was it warmth? He couldn't remember. Had disappeared instantly. That was a little confusing to me. When does he not remember? is it immediately after the sensation disappeared that he couldn't remember what exactly it was? My first impression of the phrase is that he's actually remembering back on this whole scene, and that detail is a little fuzzy. So what were you trying to get across with that?
I was trying to get across that he's been paying attention to so many different things. All he remembers was that he felt something, and now he doesn't. But if it's confusing to the reader to say he couldn't remember, we could probably just remove those 3 words. The initial chill, or was it warmth, had disappeared instantly, and just not say he couldn't remember.
Yeah.
The fact that we asked the question might be enough to say, okay, there's a little bit of confusion. He felt something, but he doesn't now. Yeah. So that's good feedback.
His fingertips listened for the genetic song of the microbes. What does this mean? How does one listen with their fingers? And then further on, or shortly after that, there was a simple and faint, but clearly, there it was, simple and faint, but clearly audible through the cells of his skin. What does it mean? What does it feel like to experience that? It seems like there's a whole world of experience that's going undocumented.
What does it feel like to be able to translate vibrations on a membrane of your body and perceive it as notes and pitches? What does that feel like? And this is one of those where I was borrowing from, I think, a technique I mentioned from Brandon Sanderson, where he talked about the main character. She burned her luck and she needed to preserve it. It's like, I'm just going to describe this to you as if you know what I'm talking about, and we'll just trust you to figure it out and come along. The point is, he doesn't even know that it's different. To him, it's just completely natural.
Interesting. So even though this is a novel experience for him, because this is the first time he's doing something like this?
Yes.
So
it's just like, well, it's the first time he's doing something deliberately like this, but because his skin has had the capability all his life, he doesn't even realize that it's something different. He's walking through and experiencing whatever's going on, and he doesn't know the difference between what he hears through his skin and what he hears through his ears. Or maybe he does, but he doesn't even recognize that it's significant that there's a difference. That's kind of where I'm going with that.
I like the sentence at the end of the next paragraph. The song suddenly grew, not louder, but far more intricate. The use of the punctuation there to evoke a kind of a sense of uncertainty, I think is effective. But I'm not sure about the word suddenly, especially since that sentence seems like you want to take your time on it. And then also the very next sentence says in an instant. So we have that the idea of quickness already. And it seems kind of redundant to have suddenly and then also in an instant. And I think just getting rid of suddenly here, because that grew not louder but far more intricate. You're kind of taking some time to figure out what's going on there. And then it's the next sentence that has that rapid intensity to it.
I'm curious, much like how at the beginning you talked about the gasoline, you pictured the gasoline, and it wasn't until later you figured out, oh no, I got it wrong and had to correct it. Inviting somebody to perceive it as taking time at the end of one paragraph and then only later saying it happened in an instant. I'm wondering if a similar type of confusion reaction might happen.
Well, I interpreted these as 2 different events. In part,
they're different paragraphs.
Yeah, they're different paragraphs. So the song is growing.
Oh,
so
I need to move that. I need to combine those. In an instant, the song grew not louder but far more intricate. Otherworldly tunes. Okay. I need to rearrange it that way and move that into the next paragraph.
I think that could work. I kind of interpret it as kind of like a logarithmic, like it's starting to grow here, and then all of a sudden it just shoots up in the beginning of this paragraph.
And I can see that the way it's structured now, and that's not what I was trying to convey. And that's really good feedback to invite a rearranging there.
But I do like that sentence. In an instant, otherworldly tunes, unlike any he had ever heard, with ears or hands, doubled and tripled, with new voices added at a furious pace. There's something about that sentence structure demands it to be read quickly. And I'm not sure why, but it's perfect.
I think part of it is I did not say with his ears or his hands. Just with ears or hands. I think that might be part of it, just cutting out all the words that aren't needed there.
I think that the in an instant and then finishing it off with a furious pace just compounds the intensity of it. Okay. Overlapping microtonal melodies. I have some music background. I'm still not. It took me a little bit to remember what does microtonal mean, and so I think depending on the purpose of the word, that can be effective. If you're trying to convey that this is confusing and he's not really sure what this whole song is, I think that can be a very effective, because it is a confusing word to a lot of people.
That is exactly
okay.
It's like, whoa, he's feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Whoa, it's like nothing's happening. Let me move around, and then just like, ah,
yeah. So
without being able to tell you what he's thinking.
Right. Yes. I think if you were trying to get across more clarity of what was going on, that a different word would be better. But the whole confusion of what's going on, I think that's a good word choice. His hands felt nothing, but they seemed to have heard everything. That's seemed to have is, I think, helpful in underscoring that Arnold himself doesn't know what's going on. And then I guess this next part is probably similar to what we discussed a little bit earlier, but he began playing and mimicking the genetic tune and sending his own rendition back into the pool. How? What does it mean to play a genetic tune? And how does he know that he's doing it, especially if this is his first time?
I think he doesn't know that he's doing it.
Okay.
Much like if you hear something and you don't even notice that you're humming along. You don't even notice that you started realizing. Yeah, that you started whistling. His first hint is the next sentence.
Okay. The hint of blue light. Then the next sentence, immediately afterwards, he started to feel a mild sting. That opening of that sentence felt a little cluttered for trying to portray immediacy.
Okay.
Because we see immediately, but then it's not until several words later that we get to the sting.
Yes. Afterwards doesn't even need to be there.
I think afterwards can, because it says he first noticed.
Okay.
And so my first thought was that you don't need afterwards. Looking back, I think it can be helpful.
Okay. All right.
Maybe not necessary, but I think it is helpful. But that he started to feel before we even get to the sensation kind of loses the immediacy of it, I think. And if you just switch it around to say something like, immediately afterwards, a mild sting pierced his hand, or pierced his skin wherever it had joined the song. So the sting is more immediately after immediately.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think pierced might be a little bit strong, but I definitely like the rearranged structure of the sentence.
Yeah. And then I like the ending there. He saw instead was a huge smile and eyes that appeared to beam with curiosity, because that invokes even more of the reader's own curiosity of what just happened. And I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen next. What even just happened? What was that whole thing? What was in that pool there? So yeah, I think it was an interesting introduction to this whole new world of these microbes.
All right. Well, thank you.
Do you have any other thoughts on the critiques as a whole?
On my experience in reading through them, I noticed myself getting defensive in reading. And that's something that, as a writer, I need to learn to change, to be ready to, on the one hand, welcome new insights, better ways of doing things, and recognize when that's important and when, like professional writers often do with their professional editors, have to say, I see where you're coming from. This is what I was trying to accomplish. And that there's room for both of those. My tendency is to lean more towards the, let me explain what I was trying to do. And I need to be more ready to, it took me a couple of readings to become the person who is ready to accept the critique. So that's one of the things that I noticed about this.
All right.
But this was an excellent experience for me getting that feedback. It's fun to be able to explore the world a little bit and to share that with you. I would invite your comments either on what you think of this format of us sharing our critiques with each other, what you think of this particular passage, what you think of the feedback, any feedback that you'd have on your own. Look forward to reading that in the comments, and we will come back next week with another non-spoiler episode.